Finance Minister Jim Flaherty announced this week that the federal government is going to post a surplus for the very first time in several years, just in time for the next election. The surplus is going to be about $3.7 billion if the government's numbers hold true for another year and a half. What should we do with the surplus?
Well, just like the fact the government's kind of fiscal situation is a bit precarious, so is our economic situation in Canada. So I think we need to be sending what modest surplus we might have in areas that will help spur economic growth in the country so that those government revenues will continue to grow and we'd have more of a surplus going forward. So an example of that would be an area like infrastructure funding, and that sounds really dull, but what we're talking about is the roads, the bridges, the things that make our economy work. And the great part about that is that comes with jobs in the short term and it comes with productivity for our economy in the long term.
I think the government should take a balanced approach. We have a big, huge debt that got bigger under Mr. Flaherty. He started out as a surplus. He had $13 billion extra, and it went down, down, down till he was digging into the piggy bank with more money than we've got. I think we need a balanced approach, which is pay down some of the debt and invest in the areas that are going to make the country grow. Infrastructure, the government's already doing. It's already building roads. It's helping communities and cities look at transit and so on. They could be doing more, but that's not what we need to use that small bit of money for. We need to look at investment in research and development, the areas that we can make our economy better and create this scenario where there's new kinds of jobs for people to go into.
This is a modest surplus. So $3.7 billion is not a lot of money. As Robin and Susan said, it's a precarious economic situation. I think the government should be very modest, spend the lion's share of the money paying down debt, make sure that we've got a solid fiscal situation for the next few years. I think, you know, keeping the debt down, therefore interest rates low, therefore sort of international stability and international confidence in investment in Canada, I think is the way to go. Tax relief, probably in a couple of years, but I'd like to see some stability first.
I'm going to have to disagree with Jason on that. I mean, I do agree that paying down debt is a prudent thing to do when you can afford to do it and when the economy dictates that it's the opportune time to do that. Unfortunately, right now, it just isn't the case. Interest rates are extraordinarily low. Governments, by their very nature, have access to very low interest rates. So I think right now is the time actually to make sure the economy keeps growing. That includes the things Susan's talking about. More investments in research and development, also more investments in people. And closing the income inequality gap helps the economy. When people have more money, they buy more things and they spur economic growth. Unfortunately, $3.7 billion doesn't allow for much of that, but so there's other things we'd have to tackle.
I think the reality of what you're going to see with $3.7 billion, Althea, you talked about it. This budget surplus is going to come just in time for the next election. So what you're going to see is the government, the Conservatives, the finance minister, promising things to Canadians with that money. Things that maybe aren't necessarily in the best interests of the country. Maybe it's not new roads, but it's something that's going to make people think it's going to make a difference immediately right away in their homes. It may be good short-term, making people feel good, but it maybe isn't in the long-term best interest of the country or the economy to make those kinds of investments with that $3.7 billion.
2 points. If not now, when, in terms of paying down debt? You mentioned it's been several years since we had a surplus. When you have to, you know, mathematically have a surplus to pay down debt, if not now, when? You know, you actually have to pay it down when you have a surplus. Second, the Conservative Party has promised, once it balances the books, to bring in a tax relief measure called income splitting. The kind of measure you're probably talking about is something maybe your party wouldn't bring in, maybe they would recommend. Income splitting is a way to essentially you know, make the tax situation of the household one big tax situation. And it usually cuts taxes for families. That's something the Conservatives have said is a big priority. Obviously, a political winner, possibly. So I think that's something in terms of the decisions that might come forward in terms of the 2015.